Katie Walsh pressed her face against the small window of the transport ship and watched Jupiter grow larger in front of them. The giant planet looked beautiful, with its swirling clouds and red spot that seemed to stare back at her like a huge eye. She had seen pictures of Jupiter many times, but seeing it in person made her stomach flutter with excitement and nervousness. The transport ship was small and cramped with 20 other humans who were all heading to the same place she was. New Horizons Station orbited Jupiter like a tiny metal moon, and it would be her home for the next 6 months. Katie had been training for this moment for 2 years, since she first applied to be part of the cultural exchange program. She was 24 years old and had been a Marine for 6 years. Katie had served in 3 different countries and had seen combat twice, but nothing had prepared her for this. She was going to live and work with real aliens from other planets. The thought made her hands shake a little as she checked her uniform. One more time. The other humans on the transport were all military too. Some were Navy officers, and others were Marines like her, but they all had one thing in common. They were the best and brightest that Earth had to offer. Out of 50,000 people who applied for the program, only 50 were chosen, and Katie was one of them. She looked at the tablet in her hands that contained all the information about the 12 alien species she would meet on the station. The pictures were strange and sometimes scary. Some aliens looked almost human, while others were so different that Katie had trouble understanding how they could even exist. The Kralians were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. They were tall and covered in what looked like natural armor. The pictures showed they had 4 arms and were much stronger than humans. Katie read that they had taken over 17 different star systems by force and were known as the best warriors in the galaxy. The transport captain announced over the speaker that they would dock with New Horizon in 30 minutes. Katie felt her heart beat faster as she put the tablet away and looked out the window again. The station was getting bigger, and she could see it was huge. It looked like a metal city floating in space, with lights twinkling in hundreds of windows. When the transport finally docked, Katie grabbed her bag and followed the other humans through the airlock. The first thing she noticed was that the air smelled different. It was clean, but had a metallic taste that reminded her of being inside a submarine. A second thing she noticed was how quiet everything was compared to Earth. A tall woman in a Navy uniform was waiting for them in the docking bay. She had short gray hair and serious eyes that looked like they had seen a lot of things. Katie recognized her from the briefing materials as Commander Lisa Brooks, who was in charge of all the human personnel on the station. Commander Brooks waited until all 20 humans were standing in front of her before she started talking. Her voice was strong and clear and carried easily in the large docking bay. She told them that they were making history and that everything they did would be watched by people on Earth and aliens throughout the galaxy. She explained that the cultural exchange program was designed to help different species understand each other better. Each human would be paired with an alien partner, and they would live and work together for 6 months. The goal was to learn about each other's cultures and find ways to work together peacefully. Katie listened carefully as Commander Brooks explained the rules. They were to be respectful at all times and remember that they represented all of humanity. Any problems or conflicts should be reported immediately. Most importantly, they should never forget that they were guests on the station and should behave accordingly. After the briefing, Katie was taken to her quarters, which were small but comfortable. She had a bed, a desk, and a small bathroom all to herself. The walls were metal and painted white, and there was one small window that looked out into space. She unpacked her few belongings and tried to make the room feel more like home. Few hours later, Katie was called to meet her alien partner. She walked through the corridors of the station and saw her first real aliens. A group of small blue creatures with large eyes walked past her and nodded politely. Katie nodded back and tried not to stare, even though she was fascinated by how they moved. The meeting room was large and had chairs of different sizes to accommodate different alien species. Katie sat in a regular human chair and waited nervously for her partner to arrive. She had been told his name was Ziktar, and he was a Kralian, but she did not know anything else about him. When the door opened, Katie's eyes went wide. Ziktar was enormous. He had to duck to get through the doorway, and when he stood up straight, he was at least 7 feet tall. His skin looked like brown leather armor, and his forearms were thick with muscle. His face was almost human, but his eyes were yellow, and his mouth was full of sharp teeth. Ziktar looked down at Katie and made a sound that might have been laughter, but sounded more like a growl. He sat down in a chair that was built for his size, and the metal creaked under his weight. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. He told Katie that he had heard about humans and was curious to see what all the fuss was about. He said that humans were supposed to be smart, but they looked very weak and small. Katie tried to smile and be polite as she introduced herself, but Ziktar interrupted her. He said that on his home world only the strong survived and the weak were left behind. He looked Katie up and down like he was examining a piece of meat and shook his head. He said he did not understand why humans were invited to join the galactic community when they were obviously not capable of defending themselves. Katie felt her face get hot, but she remembered her training and stayed calm. She explained that humans might not be as physically strong as Kralians, but they had other qualities that were valuable. She mentioned human creativity and problem-solving abilities, but Ziktar just laughed. The meeting lasted for an hour, and Katie felt exhausted. When it was over, Ziktar had spent most of the time talking about battles he had fought and enemies he had defeated. Every story seemed designed to show Katie how weak and helpless humans were compared to his species. Katie returned to her quarters that night. She sat on her bed and wondered what she had gotten herself into. 6 months suddenly seemed like a very long time, and she had a feeling that Ziktar was going to make every day difficult for her. 3 weeks had passed since Katie first met Ziktar, and every day had been harder than the last. The Kralian warrior seemed to take pleasure in making her life difficult, and never missed a chance to remind her how weak humans were compared to his species. During their daily training sessions, Ziktar would deliberately use his superior strength to show Katie up in front of the other aliens. When they practiced combat moves, he would grab her too hard and leave bruises on her arms. When they worked on diplomatic exercises, he would interrupt her constantly and tell everyone that humans had no business being part of the galactic community. Katie tried to stay professional and follow her training, but it was getting harder every day. She had been taught to be respectful and diplomatic, but Ziktar seemed to interpret her politeness as weakness. The more patient she was with him, the more aggressive he became. The other humans on the station were having similar problems with their alien partners. During lunch in the human section of the cafeteria, Katie would listen to stories from her fellow Marines and officers. Most of the aliens seemed to be testing them in different ways to see how they would react. Jake Murphy was paired with a reptilian creature called a Vorthik, who kept challenging him to eating contests with foods that were poisonous to humans. When Jake politely declined, the Vorthik would laugh and tell other aliens that humans were too scared to even eat properly. Amy Carter was working with a floating jellyfish-like alien that communicated through color changes. The alien would flash bright red lights that hurt Amy's eyes during their meetings, and then act confused when she complained. It claimed that the lights were normal communication, and that humans must have defective vision. Katie began to realize that this was not just random bullying. The aliens were conducting tests to see how humans would respond to pressure and aggression. So far, most of the humans were responding exactly how their diplomatic training had taught them to respond, with patience and understanding. But Katie was starting to wonder if that was the wrong approach. She spent her free time in the station library reading about the different alien cultures and their histories. What she found was troubling and made her think that humans were being set up to fail. Almost every alien species in the galactic community had earned their place through some form of strength or dominance. The Kralians had conquered other worlds through military might. The Zephyrians had superior technology that made them valuable allies. The Crystallites had psychic powers that others feared and respected. Humans had been invited to join because they had developed nuclear weapons and space travel, but compared to the other species, they were still very new and untested. Katie began to suspect that the cultural exchange program was actually a way for the aliens to confirm the humans were weak and did not deserve equal treatment. The worst part was that Zektar seemed to be enjoying himself. During their combat training sessions, he would pin Katie to the ground and hold her there just long enough to make her feel helpless. He would laugh and tell her that this was how all conflicts between their species would end, with humans on the ground begging for mercy. One day during zero gravity combat training, Zektar went too far. They were practicing hand-to-hand fighting in a large spherical room where gravity had been turned off. The exercise was supposed to teach them how to work together in space environments, but Zektar used it as another chance to humiliate Katie. He grabbed her with two of his forearms and spun her around before throwing her hard against the padded wall. Katie bounced off and tried to regain her balance, but Zektar was already coming at her again. He slammed into her with his full body weight and sent her crashing into the opposite wall. Katie felt the air get knocked out of her lungs and saw stars in front of her eyes. Before she could recover, Zektar grabbed her again and threw her even harder. This time Katie hit the wall so hard that she bounced off and floated helplessly in the middle of the room, gasping for breath. The alien instructor who was supposed to be supervising the exercise was a tall, thin creature with 6 legs, called a mantoid. It watched the whole thing happen and did nothing to stop Zektar from continuing his assault on Katie. When she finally managed to activate her emergency beacon to end the exercise, the mantoid simply noted that the session was complete. After the training, Katie went to the medical bay to get checked for injuries. The human doctor, there was a Navy officer named Dr. Ryan Bell, who had seen several other humans with similar injuries from their training sessions. He cleaned up Katie's cuts and bruises and gave her pain medication, but he looked worried. Dr. Bell told Katie that he had been seeing more and more humans coming in with injuries that seemed excessive for training exercises. He said he had tried to report his concerns to the station medical board, but they dismissed his complaints as cultural misunderstandings. Katie asked Dr. Bell if he thought the aliens were deliberately trying to hurt the humans. He looked around to make sure no one was listening and then told her that he was starting to think the whole cultural exchange program was a setup. He believed the aliens wanted to prove that humans were too weak to be taken seriously. That evening, Katie went to see Commander Brooks to report what had happened during the training session. The commander listened carefully to Katie's story and made notes on her tablet, but her expression was grim. She told Katie that several other humans had made similar complaints, but the alien administrators kept dismissing them. Commander Brooks explained that the humans were in a difficult position. If they complained too much about the treatment they were receiving, the aliens could claim that humans were not tough enough for the program. If they did nothing, then the abuse would continue and probably get worse. She told Katie that the eyes of the entire galaxy were on them, and that their performance would determine how humanity was treated in the future. The other alien species were watching to see if humans could handle the pressure of being part of an advanced galactic civilization. Katie left the meeting feeling frustrated and angry. She was tired of being treated like a punching bag, and she was starting to think that maybe the diplomatic approach was not working. As she walked back to her quarters, she made a decision that would change everything. The formal diplomatic reception was the biggest event that had happened on New Horizons Station since Katie arrived. Representatives from all 12 alien species were attending, along with important officials from their home worlds who had traveled great distances to be there. The event was being broadcast live across the galaxy as a symbol of unity and cooperation between different civilizations. Katie stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her dress uniform for the 10th time. The blue fabric was crisp and clean, and her medals were polished until they shined. She had spent an hour making sure every detail was perfect because she knew that billions of beings across the galaxy would be watching. Commander Brooks had given all the humans strict instructions about how to behave at the reception. They were to be polite and respectful at all times and avoid any conflicts or disagreements. The commander had stressed that this was humanity's chance to show the galaxy that they could be trusted partners in the galactic community. The reception hall was enormous and decorated with flags and symbols from all the member species of the Galactic Coalition. Floating cameras moved silently through the crowd, recording everything for the live broadcast. Katie had never seen so many different types of aliens in one place, and the sight was both amazing and overwhelming. She spotted Zektar across the room talking to a group of other Kralian warriors who had come to the station for the reception. Even among his own people, he stood out as being particularly large and intimidating. Katie tried to stay as far away from him as possible and focus on talking to the more friendly aliens. The evening went well for the first few hours. Katie had pleasant conversations with several different species and even managed to make some jokes that translated well across different cultures. She was starting to think that maybe the reception would pass without any problems when she noticed Zektar walking toward her. The Kralian warrior had been drinking something that looked like thick purple liquid, and his yellow eyes were brighter than usual. He was moving with the confident swagger that Katie had learned meant he was looking for trouble. Several other aliens moved out of his way as he approached her position near the main viewing window. Zektar stopped directly in front of Katie and spoke in a voice that was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He announced that he wanted to demonstrate something important to all the beings present at this historic gathering. He said that there had been too much talk about cooperation and friendship when what really mattered was strength and power. Katie felt her stomach drop as she realized what was happening. Zektar was going to use the reception as a stage to humiliate her in front of the entire galaxy. She looked around for help, but Commander Brooks was on the other side of the massive hall, and the nearest security guards were all aliens who seemed more interested in watching than intervening. Zektar raised his voice even louder and began talking about the importance of traditional values and customs. He said that his people had always believed that respect must be earned through demonstrations of physical capability. He claimed that this was a universal truth that applied to all species, regardless of their technology or intelligence. The crowd around them began to grow as more aliens stopped their conversations to watch what was happening. Katie could see the floating cameras moving closer to get better angles of whatever was about to occur. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare where she could see disaster approaching but could not escape. Zektar announced that he wanted to perform a traditional Kralian greeting with his human partner to show the galaxy how different species could honor each other's customs. He explained that this greeting was a sacred ritual among his people that demonstrated mutual respect and understanding between warriors. Katie knew immediately that this was a lie. She had studied Kralian culture extensively, and there was no such greeting ritual. Zektar was making it up as an excuse to attack her while making it look like a cultural ceremony. She opened her mouth to object, but Zektar cut her off before she could speak. He told the watching crowd that some species might find Kralian customs to be aggressive or violent, but that this was simply their way of showing honor and respect. He said that humans claimed to be brave and strong, so they should have no problem participating in this harmless traditional ceremony. Katie realized that she was completely trapped. If she refused to participate, Zektar would claim that humans were cowards who had no respect for other cultures. If she agreed to participate, she would be giving him permission to attack her in front of the entire galaxy. Either way, she would look weak and reinforce every negative stereotype about humanity. The crowd was completely silent now, as everyone waited to see what would happen. Katie could feel the weight of billions of eyes watching her through the broadcast cameras. She thought about Commander Brooks and all the other humans on the station who were counting on her to represent their species well. She looked at Zektar's face and saw the cruel satisfaction in his yellow eyes. He was enjoying this moment and the power he had over her. Katie realized that this had been his plan all along, to create a situation where she would have no choice but to submit to his will in front of the entire galaxy. Katie took a deep breath and tried to think of a way out of the situation, but there was none. She was bound by her diplomatic training and her duty to avoid causing an international incident. She had been taught that the needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few, and that sometimes individuals had to sacrifice for the greater good. With no other options available, Katie nodded her agreement to participate in Zektar's fake greeting ceremony. The crowd pressed closer as the cameras moved into position to capture every detail of what was about to happen. Katie closed her eyes for a moment and prepared herself for whatever was coming next. When she opened her eyes, again Zektar was smiling, with all his sharp teeth showing. He raised one of his massive forearms high above his head, and the crowd held its breath. Katie stood perfectly still and waited for the blow that she knew was coming, while the entire galaxy watched through the broadcast cameras. The blow came faster than Katie expected. Zektar's massive hand struck her face with the force of a sledgehammer, and the sound echoed through the silent reception hall like a gunshot. Katie felt her nose break instantly and tasted blood in her mouth as she flew backward and crashed to the floor. Pain exploded through her head, and stars danced in front of her eyes. Blood poured from her broken nose and dripped onto her clean dress uniform, staining the blue fabric dark red. Katie rolled onto her side and struggled to breathe through the blood that was running down her throat. The entire reception hall was completely silent. Hundreds of aliens from 12 different species watched as the human girl lay bleeding on the polished floor. The floating cameras moved closer to capture every detail of her injuries for the billions of beings watching the live broadcast across the galaxy. Zektar stood over Katie with all 4 of his arms crossed and a satisfied expression on his face. He announced loudly that this was what happened when weak species tried to pretend they belonged among the strong. He said that humans were pathetic creatures who had no business being part of the galactic community. Katie pushed herself up onto her hands and knees and spit blood onto the floor. Her vision was blurry, and her head felt like it was splitting apart, but she could hear every word that Zektar was saying. He was telling the watching crowd that this demonstration proved everything he had been saying about human weakness. Kralian warrior turned to address the cameras directly. He said that the galaxy had made a mistake by inviting humans to join the coalition. He claimed that humans were too fragile and cowardly to survive in a universe where only the strong prospered. He suggested that Earth should be placed under the protection of a more capable species. Other aliens in the crowd began to murmur their agreement with Zektar's words. Katie could hear them discussing how disappointed they were in human capabilities and how this incident confirmed their worst fears. Some were already talking about what would happen to Earth now the humans had been proven unworthy. Katie wiped the blood from her face and slowly pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were shaky and her head was pounding, but she managed to stand upright. The crowd fell silent again as they watched to see what the injured human would do next. Most expected her to run away or call for help like a frightened child. Zektar had his back turned to Katie as he continued his speech to the cameras. He was enjoying his moment of triumph and basking in the attention from the galactic audience. He talked about Kralian superiority and how his people had always known that humans were inferior beings who would crumble under pressure. Katie looked around the reception hall and saw the faces of hundreds of aliens watching her. Some looked pleased that their suspicions about humans had been confirmed. Others seemed curious about what she would do next. A few actually looked disappointed, as if they had hoped humans would prove to be stronger. She thought about all the humans back on Earth who were probably watching this broadcast. Millions of people who had been proud when she was selected for the cultural exchange program were now seeing her humiliated on live television. She thought about her parents and her little brother, who had always believed she was the strongest person they knew. Katie also thought about Commander Brooks and the other 49 humans on the station who were representing their entire species. Everything they had worked for and trained for was being destroyed by this one moment of violence. The future of human participation in the galactic community was hanging in the balance. But most of all, Katie thought about her Marine training and the oath she had taken to defend Earth and its people. She had sworn to never give up and never surrender no matter what the odds were against her. That oath meant something to her, and she was not going to break it now when it mattered most. Katie began walking slowly towards Zektar, who was still making his speech with his back turned to her. Her footsteps were silent on the polished floor, and none of the watching aliens made any sound to warn him. They were all curious to see what the bleeding human was planning to do. Some of the aliens recognized the look in Katie's eyes. They had seen that same expression on the faces of the most dangerous predators on their home worlds. It was the look of a creature that had been hurt and was now deciding whether to run or fight back. The smart money was usually on running, but something about this human seemed different. Katie stopped directly behind Zektar and listened to him finish his speech about human weakness. He was telling the galaxy that this incident should serve as a lesson about the importance of strength and the foolishness of trying to include inferior species in galactic affairs. He said that humans should be grateful for the protection of their betters. The crowd held its breath as Katie reached out with both hands toward Zektar's primary right arm. Her Marine training had included extensive combat instruction, and she knew exactly where to grab and how much pressure to apply. The technique she was about to use worked regardless of size or strength differences because it relied on leverage and anatomy. Katie's hands locked onto Zektar's arm just above the elbow joint. She planted her feet firmly and used her entire body weight to execute the move exactly as she had been taught. The leverage was perfect, and physics took over as the much smaller human applied force in precisely the right direction. The sound of Zektar's arm breaking was like a tree branch snapping in a windstorm. The massive Kralian warrior dropped to his knees, screaming in pain and shock as his primary arm bent at an impossible angle. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds from start to finish. Katie stood over the injured alien and spoke in a clear, calm voice that carried throughout the silent reception hall. She said that in human culture, they called what she had just done teaching someone manners. Blood was still streaming from her broken nose, but her voice was steady and strong. The reception hall remained frozen in silence for several long seconds after Katie spoke. Nobody moved and nobody breathed as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The small human female had broken the arm of one of the galaxies. Most feared warriors in less time than it took to blink. Katie knelt down beside Zektar, who was still screaming and holding his shattered arm. Despite everything he had done to her, she gently helped him sit up and called for medical assistance. in a calm professional voice. Her actions showed both her strength in defeating him and her compassion in helping him. Afterward, Dr. Bell and the alien medical team arrived within minutes and began treating both Katie and Zektar for their injuries. The Kralian warrior had stopped screaming, but his face was twisted in pain and shock. He kept staring at Katie as if he could not believe what had happened to him. Commander Brooks pushed through the crowd and reached Katie just as the medics were cleaning the blood from her face. The commander's expression was unreadable, but Katie could see worry and pride fighting for control in her eyes. She asked Katie if she was all right and received a small nod in response. The alien representatives began talking among themselves in excited whispers. Many of them had never seen a human fight before, and they were impressed by the speed and efficiency of Katie's technique. The floating cameras continued recording everything for the galactic audience, who were probably just as stunned as the beings in the reception hall. Over the next few hours, news of the incident spread throughout the station and across the galaxy. The reaction was unlike anything anyone had expected. Instead of being angry about the violence, most alien species were expressing respect and admiration for Katie's response to Zektar's attack. The mantoid ambassador approached Katie the next morning while she was having breakfast in the human section of the cafeteria. The tall, insect-like creature moved gracefully on its 6 legs and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. It told Katie that her actions had been discussed by the Galactic Council, and they were very pleased with what they had seen. The ambassador explained that most species had been concerned about human capabilities since they joined the coalition. Humans seemed intelligent and creative, but they also appeared to be physically weak and overly dependent on diplomacy. Many aliens had wondered if humans would be able to defend themselves or their allies when violence became necessary. Katie's response to Zektar had answered those questions perfectly. She had shown that humans could absorb punishment and still fight back effectively. More importantly, she had demonstrated wisdom by using exactly the right amount of force needed to stop the threat, and then showing mercy by helping her defeated opponent. The ambassador told Katie that this combination of traits was extremely rare in the galaxy. Most species were either too aggressive and would have killed Zektar, or too passive and would have accepted the humiliation. Humans appeared to have found the perfect balance between strength and restraint that made them ideal peacekeeping partners. Similar conversations were happening all over the station as alien representatives sought out humans to discuss what they had witnessed. The cultural exchange program suddenly became much more successful as aliens, who had previously dismissed humans, began treating them with genuine respect and interest. Zektar himself underwent the biggest change of all. After his arm was healed and placed in a regeneration cast, he asked to speak with Katie privately. When they met in the same room where they had first been introduced 3 weeks earlier, his entire attitude was different. The Kralian warrior began by apologizing for his behavior and acknowledging that he had been wrong about humans. He explained that in his culture, strength was the only thing that mattered, and he had assumed that Katie's diplomatic responses meant she was weak. Her actions at the reception had proven him completely wrong. Zektar told Katie that she had earned his respect in the traditional Kralian way through combat victory. He said that any warrior who could break his arm deserved to be treated as an equal regardless of their species or size. He asked if she would be willing to continue their partnership on new terms. Based on mutual respect, Katie agreed, and over the remaining months of the program, she and Zektar developed a genuine friendship. The Kralian warrior became one of humanity's strongest supporters and often told other aliens about human courage and fighting ability. He seemed to take pride in the fact that his former partner had impressed the entire galaxy. The other humans on the station also found that their treatment improved dramatically after the reception incident. Aliens who had been testing them with aggressive behavior suddenly became cooperative and respectful. The cultural exchange program became the success it was always meant to be. Commander Brooks received communications from Earth, congratulating the human team on their performance. The incident had been broadcast live to billions of people, and the response from the home world was overwhelmingly positive. Katie became something of a celebrity and received thousands of messages from people thanking her for standing up for humanity. 6 months after arriving at New Horizons Station, Katie and the other humans prepared to return to Earth. Their time in the cultural exchange program was complete, and they had accomplished far more than anyone had hoped. Humanity's reputation in the galactic community had been transformed from questionable newcomers to respected partners. Katie's final assignment came as a surprise to everyone, including herself. The Galactic Council offered her a permanent position. As Earth's first interspecies combat instructor, she would be responsible for training both humans and aliens in combined tactics and serving as a liaison between different military forces. The night before leaving the station, Katie stood at the same window where she had first seen Jupiter months earlier. The giant planet looked the same, but everything else had changed. She touched the small scar on her nose where Zektar had broken it and smiled at the memory. Katie wrote in her personal log that day that she had learned something important about peace and respect. Sometimes the best way to make peace was to be prepared for war, and sometimes the best way to earn respect was to show that you were willing to defend it. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but humans had proven they belonged there.